the university and what Princeton offers, and try to contextualize that with how that falls into the common aspects of what higher education in the United States is like. I think Education USA is a great resource. They are great resources both for you and both for us. We partner with these organizations in helping us kind of understand your background and conversely helping you understand, the United States education and everything. So I'll try to contextualize a little bit about the university and how those processes work and how Princeton falls in that. And then I'll also talk about the admission process as well as financial aid processes or scholarships. And again, contextualizing a bit about what the greater landscape of that looks like in the United States, and as well how Princeton falls into that contextually as well. So just a couple of things to add here. As Anya said, she'll happy to provide more information about Princeton. If you'd like to just sign up directly through our website, you can do so through this link that I just put in the chat box as well. This is a good way to kind of stay in touch with us, be in our prospect system before you even submit an application as well. So as Anya said, we'll want to make sure that I'm talking about things that are interesting and relevant to you as well. So we'll definitely leave time at the end to answer your questions, whether it's you like to ask verbally, unmuting, or in the chat box or whatever. When we get to that, I'll try to leave time for that as well. I think I know some of you may be more familiar with different things than others in terms of Princeton or the university in the U.S. and whatnot. So I know some of you may know quite a bit. Some of you may have zero or very little information. So I'll try to cover kind of the basics. So bear with me if I'm saying things that you already know. But also I think we'll try to cover the, like I said, pieces that are fundamental to understanding the U.S. higher education, Princeton admission processes, scholarships, and so forth. So to begin, I'm going to share my screen here to go with some just some visuals that I think will help to contextualize a little bit about Princeton and talk about the pieces that are most relevant as well. So I'll first start with a slide about where we're located exactly. I say fundamentally, it's easy to remember where Princeton is. Princeton is in Princeton. The university is named after the town of Princeton, New Jersey. It's a small suburban town, so it's not a big city, in the center of New Jersey, which is a very diverse state, right along this northeastern corridor in the United States. So other landmarks you might be more familiar with, New York City, Philadelphia, major American cities, they're each about 50 miles or maybe 90 kilometers away from Princeton Township. So it's a very good balance of being in this area of what is a very small town, a very safe town in the middle of New Jersey, but having proximity to New York City. And the public transportation in this state, in this area of the country, is very good. It's a very densely populated area. So there's actually a train station right on our campus. So you don't have to have a car or anything. You can literally walk from your residence on campus to the train station. It'll take you to New York, to Philadelphia, to airports, or anywhere you need to. And like I said, very easily done within a day. New York City is about, like I said, an hour and a half away by train travel time. So you can go up there for the day, for the evening, or whatever, and then come back and be on our campus in our setting. And like I said, we're in a small town. So a very common description you'll hear of different areas of U.S. universities. Some of them are in big cities, like in New York City or in Philadelphia. Some of them are in kind of more rural areas, and some of them are in kind of like what we call a college town. A college town is, again, that suburban area which is surrounded by local streets, local shops, local businesses, and other residences as well. So what you see here is these are the main gates of campus. This is one of the usual events that the university, or the town and the university collaborate with, called Communiversity, where different shops and businesses will set up tents, as you see here, right outside the main area of campus. So this street here you see pictured as Nassau Street, which is right outside of our main gates. The rest of campus expands back here as well, south, and then you've got other parts of campus here in the church, and then the rest of the businesses and the residences will be kind of beyond this way as well. So it's a very easy, walkable town, and so forth. Like I said, if you need to get to a more urban area, you've got trains, there are taxi cabs and ride shares and everything and so forth. A lot of students bike around because it's very easy to bike in this area, not just on the streets, but also in some of our biking paths as well. There are a lot of state parks where you can bike along nature trails, hiking, and so forth. Not as well known necessarily in this area. So it's a very diverse area. So I spent a little bit of time talking about the setting because that's a very common thing to be aware of with respect to U.S. institutions, and that these are more than just commuting areas. You don't really just commute to the campus. The U.S. educational experience is very heavily based on the residential experience, that you are living on campus. This is not just where you're learning for your undergraduate degree, but this is the community that you are physically a part of, that you are living on campus, as we call for the entirety of your degree as well. So that setting, again, this is not just where you're studying, this is where you're living, and this is the community you're a part of. And again, being in a residential area and in a very suburban area is a great benefit to our students. So I want to talk a little bit about the academics of Princeton. I think that's obviously at the forefront, and Princeton does have its reputation as an elite academic institution. Most U.S. institutions will have a combination of undergraduate or bachelor's degree programs, and then as well as graduate programs. Graduate programs more commonly, not just for academic master's or PhD degrees, but also professional degrees, law degrees, medical degrees, business degrees. For the most part, are graduate programs in the United States. You can find some similar undergraduate areas, but mostly the undergraduate is a little bit more broad than that, which is kind of a main difference between, for example, European and U.S. institutions. You don't study necessarily medicine or law at the undergraduate bachelor's level in the U.S. as you might in some European universities. So when we talk about the undergraduates, we're talking about those college students. And every institution has a different balance between how many undergraduates there are and then how many graduate students there are. So those are professional students, PhD students, and so forth. And usually the undergraduates at a major research university like Princeton, those are, the undergraduates are one of many types of different students on campus. So you'll have the undergraduate students, but then you'll have, for example, like the law school and the medicine school, the medical school, the business school, the other and whatnot. So the undergraduates exist as one of many. At Princeton, it's a little bit different. It's actually quite rare, quite a rare balance between being a major research university, but having what we call this undergraduate focus. So rather than the undergraduate college students being one of many different types of schools at the university, which is more common for U.S. research institutions, at Princeton, the undergraduates are actually the majority of all of our students. In fact, we have, as a university, we're pretty small in terms of the undergraduate population, about 5,300 undergraduates, which is small to mid-sized by U.S. standards. But more than that, we actually have twice as many undergraduates as graduate students. We have almost twice as many, just under 3,000 graduate students on our campus, because Princeton actually doesn't have professional graduate programs, law, medicine, or whatever, and that's by design. So what that means is that Princeton has a unique balance, a unique ratio of these incredible academic resources, Nobel Prize winners on our faculty, major academic resources that are so lopsidedly dedicated towards our undergraduate students, and that's actually very rare. So what that means is that you'll have very close attention between our undergraduate students and the faculty in what's pictured here, a pretty typical class size, a seminar with the students and the faculty member. The overall student to faculty ratio at Princeton is 5-to-1, which is extremely low compared to, again, other institutions of its caliber. And that allows for these close interactions with our faculty. Pictured here is Dr. Eddie Glaude, who is the chair of our African American Studies department. He's actually a major national figure when speaking about racial justice. A lot of the racial justice news events and protests that have happened over the past year within the United States, he's been on the major news networks as a major authority on Black Lives Matter movements, on the social justice, racial justice issues. And here he is teaching an undergraduate class with some first-year students, second-year students, and so forth. So that's the kind of accessibility you have with major leaders in academia at Princeton, also Nobel Prize winners among them. Pictured here is Jhumpa Lahiri, who is the chair of our creative writing department. The former poet laureate of the U.S., Tracy K. Smith, also used to teach in the creative writing department. We have Nobel Prize winners who teach first-year classes. So again, a very unique balance between these major academic resources that are accessible to undergraduates in really an unparalleled way. You'll see this at a lot of universities in the U.S., but none so much so as it is at Princeton, just because of that undergraduate focus that we have. And this allows, again, this close interaction you saw with Dr. Glaude and Dr. Lahiri here with the undergraduate students in the classrooms, but also particularly in research. And research and innovation is another major characteristic of the education experience in the U.S. Not just an opportunity to learn from faculty, to learn from the knowledge that's created at the university, but also to contribute to creating new innovative knowledge, to creating research. This is something that is available at many institutions of higher learning at the United States, especially the most elite ones, but very few offer it or guarantee it the same way Princeton does, because it is in fact required. That's why a lot of students feel that Princeton is a good fit for them, a great opportunity, because you are guaranteed the opportunity, regardless of whether you're majoring in the humanities or the arts, or sciences and engineering, or social sciences, economics, political science, or whatever, every single student is guaranteed the opportunity, required therefore the opportunity to work one-on-one with a faculty member to create their original independent research project, which we call the senior thesis. During your senior year, which is your fourth and final year, you have that opportunity, like I said, to work one-on-one with a faculty mentor to design your own individual research project. Every student does it. It's kind of a tradition, too, that a lot of students, after they complete it, will take a picture with their senior thesis. You see a student pictured here outside the main hall, and creating a project on something that's never been done before. So this can be a particular passion you have for your area of historical study or a particular scientific concept or ecosystem. It's a very personal project because it's your own design. A lot of students take advantage of the opportunity to do something that's very personal based on their cultural or personal family history or whatever. We see a lot of students doing that. And it can range from anything, like I said, to historical research, to literature research, to scientific research. I had a classmate who was an aerospace engineer who built a jet engine for his senior thesis. So again, there's a huge amount you can do with that. And this is a guaranteed opportunity for every single student, something that is usually provided at many institutions, but very few guarantee it the way that Princeton does. At the same time, we're not only coming in, requiring students just to do research and just to study their one area. You get great opportunities for depth of study, but at the same time, we are a liberal arts college, a liberal arts university that, in addition to that great depth of study, allows students a great breadth to explore beyond that. And that's something that's much more common for American universities than for European or international outside the U.S. universities that generally require you to apply to a particular program and study for the majority of that program for most of your years. At a place like Princeton, at a liberal arts college, the idea is that you do get to study what you're passionate about, but there's a greater capacity for interdisciplinary study as well as a great breadth of study beyond that. So what I mean by interdisciplinary studies, you might be interested in biology, but you might also be interested in cultural studies, so you might, or economics as well as cultural studies. So you might study economic processes in developing countries, for example. And you can basically make any combination you want. We had a student who had a computer science major with certificates or minors in classical studies, in ancient Latin history, and so forth. Again, two very disparate areas, but this allows you to cover those areas to your heart's desire based on what your interests might be. The liberal arts concept is effectively an opportunity to cover the breadth of the areas in the liberal arts spectrum. The liberal arts doesn't have anything to do with liberal versus conservative politically or anything like that. But liberal arts, it's an old Latin term that and an ethos for pedagogy that means the freedom or the liberty to pursue different areas. So yes, you might study science or you might study the humanities, but at the same time, you will still also study those other areas across the liberal arts spectrum. So you'll still take a couple courses in the humanities. You'll still take a couple courses in social sciences. And you'll still take a couple courses in math and science, regardless of what you're majoring in. And the idea behind that is, like I said, to give you that breadth of study, not just to try to dabble in different things, but also to allow you to become a leader in your particular field and understanding how your area intersects with those other disciplines. Now, for example, a science major who understands the geopolitical applications of their research or implementing different things. Vaccines is a very common example. You can do all the research and create the vaccine, but you have no way of implementing it if you don't understand the geopolitical structures beyond that as well. So I think the opportunity that this provides for you, again, is an opportunity to explore different areas, take some time to figure out what you want to do. And when you decide that, which is usually at Princeton, for example, during your second year, when you choose your major, then you start taking those advanced courses. And then, like I said, building up to your academic research, which will happen, like I said, during your third year, but primarily during your final year, your senior year within the senior thesis. So we talk a lot about academics because that is obviously what, in many cases, we are best known for. But at the same time, the learning experience and the experience of being a student at an institution like Princeton goes far beyond that academic area, which I already talked about, the fact that we are not just studying entities, but we are residential entities as well. We employ this campus experience where students live on our campuses and therefore have the opportunity not just to be in close proximity to their classrooms and their labs and where they learn, but also the students with whom they learn, the other resources. So we bring together students from a huge diverse array of different backgrounds from all over the United States, as well as all over the world internationally. We have students from, I think, about 100 different countries on campus, including Bosnia for sure, as well as other areas across other countries across Europe. About 12% of our students are international. And the idea there is that you're not just learning from the instruction of our academic faculty, but you're also learning from the diverse perspectives of your classmates, coming from different backgrounds, coming from different life experiences, coming from different whatever, and different perspectives. That is an important part of that learning experience as well, to learn from those perspectives too. And not just to do it in the classroom, but also to do it outside of that. A very common difference between the experience academically at U.S. institutions, whether it's at secondary school or high school or college, compared to outside the U.S., is the emphasis on extracurricular activities, which I think is something you're familiar with as well. This is absolutely true at Princeton. Student life at Princeton is not just limited to what you do, where you live, and what you do in the classroom, but it's your other activities that you do beyond that as well. So that might be athletics. It might be service opportunities. It might be musical opportunities like the singing group pictured here as well. Student publications, whatever you love to do, whatever you're passionate about, there are a huge range of opportunities, about 300 different organizations and opportunities to get involved in on campus that represent our incredibly diverse student body. This is a picture of the entire freshman class. And I think it's, again, a great opportunity to include that diversity on our campus. And when you hear the word diversity, a lot of people think about, again, your physical background, like where you come from, what your perspectives are. And I think that's part of it, but that's not the entirety of it. The diversity, like I said, also includes what you're interested in academically, but also outside of academics in terms of your activities, your perspectives, and how they're influenced, and how you learn and how you encounter new things to be a part of this one community as well. So we go from the first year class. This is the final year class in 2018, engaging in one of our traditions of the step sing, where they sing a song right before graduation as an entire class, to really represent, I think, a lot of different voices, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different backgrounds in our community, but all united together as one Princeton community that you are a part of for your undergraduate experience, but also after you graduate, wherever you go. This is a class from a few years ago, leaving campus on graduation, but not leaving the community. While you leave that physical campus, that community, that network of people that you are connected with, from your peers to your faculty, but also other alumni or graduates of the university, that stays with you for life. And students come back, and alumni come back every year for our reunions event. This is a picture of the reunion from the reunions event, from the P-Raid, the Princeton Parade we call, where all of our classes parade down the main drag of campus in chronological order. And it's a really good representation of how, no matter what you do after graduation, no matter where you go, no matter where you focus, you are still a part of that Princeton community, remotely, in person, or whatever, whether it's through your networks, whether it's through coming back to campus or whatever. And that's something that sets our students up extremely well for whatever they do after graduation. And commonly, it can involve some of the top graduate programs in the country and the world. About 20% of our students go directly into graduate programs, and about 70 to 80% pursue graduate programs within 5 years of graduating. A lot of students will go back to work in the U.S., in their home country, or in different countries, and so forth. But again, because of the strength of the undergraduate experience you have academically and beyond that, students at Princeton tend to do extremely well in some of the top programs academically, in careers, and so forth. So that covers, I think, the main parts of the academic experience as well as the residential experience about Princeton. The next thing to keep in mind is how processes for the application work. And when I say application, I mean the entire thing, not just the application for admission, but also applications for financial aid, for funding the education. And that's an important piece to speak about, because it's a very common knowledge, I think, or if it's not for you yet, it will be soon, that on average, higher education in the United States is, just by looking at the cost and the sticker price, much, much more expensive than it is outside of the U.S. for the most part. The good news, though, is that while this is the case, there are a ton of great financial aid opportunities available to help to make that much more affordable than you might think just by looking at what we call the sticker price, or the total cost of attendance for students. Total cost of attendance includes, again, your tuition, the cost of the actual education, but also in some cases, if you're applying to a college with a residential experience, which, like I said, is the case at Princeton, it will also include housing expenses, living expenses, your meal plan, for example, as well as other pieces on top of that. So to give you an idea, the total cost at Princeton per student per year is about $75,000 US. And that's a big number. But like I said, the good news is there are a lot of good financial aid programs. And in fact, most of our students are not paying that full cost, because obviously most students are not able to. It takes a certain amount of wealth to be able to do that. And we don't expect students to have that. And that is the benefit of a place like Princeton that has those resources to make the cost affordable by giving you a discount and applying those resources financially to you to help you support your education. Now, there are two main types of financial aid for which you can apply to U.S. institutions generally. First is merit-based institution based on, again, your merit, your achievements. So that might be your particular academic record, or it might be achievements outside of academics. Non-academics, athletics is a very common example of that. The second main type is need-based financial aid. So it's independent of merit. The need-based financial aid is effectively determining how much do you need, which is what's the difference between that cost of attendance, $75,000 at Princeton, and what your family can afford. Usually there is a gap there, except for obviously the wealthy families who can maybe afford it. But for most students, there is a difference there on how much they can contribute. And need-based financial aid is dedicated to meeting the difference between the two. So again, if the cost is this and you can contribute $10,000 a year or whatever, then the remainder, the financial aid, need-based financial aid is determined to be that difference, $65,000, $60,000 or whatever, or sometimes the entire amount. So we do have students who are paying zero because that's what their family can afford as well. So that's an important question to ask an institution that you're applying to. Do they have merit-based scholarships, and how do you apply? Because sometimes there's a separate application process, or sometimes they'll fold that into your application for admission. At Princeton, we don't have merit-based scholarships. All of our financial aid is based on need. And the reason for that is because that allows us to provide all financial aid for every single student who needs it, which is actually a rare thing universities are able to do. Princeton is actually one of 5 institutions in the U.S. that can do that for international students as well as U.S. students. Princeton is also part of the Ivy League. It's probably a term you're familiar with, less commonly known as what it actually means. The Ivy League does include elite institutions of academia such as Princeton and Harvard and Yale and so forth. But the Ivy League itself is actually an athletic conference. So also more common knowledge about the U.S. is that college athletics in higher education is a pretty serious business. It's a pretty serious program, and a lot of professional athletes in the U.S. sometimes play their sport at college. So it's a huge system in the United States. The Ivy League in particular is a conference that is managed by the NCAA, the National Athletic Conference, National Athletic Organization, but one that primarily prioritizes academics. And as a result, all Ivy League institutions, there are 8 institutions in the Ivy League, do not offer merit-based scholarships for athletics. That is a common thing for all of them. Again, a lot of institutions outside of the Ivy League will offer merit-based for athletics. Princeton and the Ivy League institutions do not offer merit-based aid of any kind. For one, because, again, students who are admitted are usually very high caliber anyway, but also because that is what allows us as Ivy League institutions, and particularly at Princeton, to dedicate all of our financial aid to the need of the students. So we guarantee to meet 100% of every single student's demonstrated need, whatever that is, and that is done with a grant. So here are some numbers. The average grants that we're giving out, over $55,000 per student per year for the most recent year. And these are grants. These are not loans. A grant is basically a gift that you do not have to pay back. And we're also, like I said, one of 5 institutions that not only can do this for all international students, but also will not factor need negatively in the admission process, meaning that we are need blind. So that's another question to ask. Are you need blind or need aware for international students? Most institutions will be need aware for international students because of the costs associated, especially even if they're private institutions or public institutions necessarily. And also because, like I said, Princeton is one of 5 that is also need blind towards international students. What that means, though, is that not only will we meet your financial aid entirely, depending on what the need is, but we will also not factor however much that is, whether it's 50% or 80% or 100% of that need, into your admission decision negatively, because we know that we can provide that for every single student. So the recommendation is apply for financial aid, for need-based financial aid, at the same time as your application for admission. And if you are admitted, that will allow you, if you've submitted all those documents, to receive not only your admission letter from us, but also your financial aid award from the financial aid office to let you know exactly what your cost of attendance will be if you decide to enroll. So that's the things to know about scholarships, or financial aid as we call it, in terms of merit-based versus need-based. And again, Princeton only offers the need-based option. I'm going to talk a little bit about the application and admission process. And I think the key pieces to highlight here are related to a lot of what I talked about. Obviously, we're looking for highly academically oriented students for sure. That's what a lot of our students are doing. But as I mentioned, there's so much more to the experience than just the academic side at Princeton. And that's what we're looking for in the overall admission process. We're not just looking for your grades or your scores or how you've done academically. We will ask for that, but that doesn't tell us everything. We want to get a sense of not just what does your transcript, what do your grades look like, but who are you as a person, and how interested are you in getting involved in the innovative approaches to our academic experience as well as the community experience as well? So what we want to know when we are evaluating you is in our holistic review, which evaluates, again, not just quantitative information, but also the entire person, who you are, what your interests are, and how you pursue them. We want to know, how are you going to contribute to the academic community? Not just what grades are you going to get, what subjects are you going to study, but why are you interested in this area? And why are you interested in this area at Princeton specifically? What is it about Princeton's politics or economics department or engineering department that aligns with your own individual interests? Beyond academics, how will a particular student participate in the greater Princeton experience? That might include, like I said, some of the extracurricular activities I talked about. It might include some of the community experiences that I mentioned. And again, this is not just about the activities you've done already in the past necessarily, especially because we understand that the opportunities and expectations for extracurriculars are much different for US students than they are for international students. So our understanding and our expectation is that whatever you've been able to do based on the emphasis or what's expected in your current context, let us know about that. Let us know about what's been important to you, whether it's been a structured activity, or whether it's been, family responsibilities that you have, or part-time work you have, or whatever. And then in addition to that, if you haven't had the opportunity to get involved in the activities that you would like to, why do those activities and what kinds of activities interest you at Princeton? Given the 300 plus organizations that we have, how will you contribute to that overall greater experience? And importantly, will you make a good roommate? A roommate being obviously a common example for your, a setup that you might live with a student you've never met before. This is not just our kind of housing form to get a sense of, are you a compatible roommate? But more importantly, are you a good member of the community? Character absolutely counts. So we're looking for students who are willing to engage, who are interested in learning from other students respectfully, or regardless of your background and how different your interests may be. Will you be a positive member of the community? And these are aspects of our experience because of our community experience that we expect and that we apply. Again, and this is a major difference for U.S. institutions in terms of their admission processes than what you might see outside of the United States. A lot of international higher education institutions are much more interested in how strong your results are, and that's the majority of the decision that they make. We absolutely take that into account. We review that contextually, absolutely. But we don't learn everything we want to know about you and how you'll take advantage of the dynamic academic and non-academic experiences at Princeton just from the grades on a paper. We want to hear about you in your voice as well as in the voices of those who know you and can write on your behalf. So these are the main things that are required for the application process at Princeton that will encapsulate all of those factors that I spoke about. So on your end, the first thing to think about is the part you have to submit. Three main components here that you are actually physically sending us. First of all, it is your application on either the Common Application or the Coalition Application. These are third-party platforms that allow you to access and apply to different U.S. institutions using kind of the same basis. You can use either one of them. They're just different platforms. Use whichever one makes the most sense for you and is easy for you. And then in addition to that, when you send that common or coalition application form to Princeton, you'll have to submit the Princeton supplement, which is several additional questions that dig a little bit deeper into your interest at Princeton, as well as the other facets of your academic and non-academic interests that I just spoke about. In addition to that, we do also require a graded written paper. So this is an essay or a written assignment that you've done for a class, ideally in high school, ideally in the last couple of years, written in English, ideally, that has been submitted for that subject in a humanities or social science area, and ideally is graded and has comments from one of your instructors. We know that this presents different challenges for international students because not all their courses are taught in English for the large part in many cases. So we ask just use whatever you can. If you have an assignment that was written, even if it's an in-class essay, as opposed to one you wrote and then submitted later, that's absolutely fine. If you've got absolutely nothing, my recommendation is find an English teacher either at your school or maybe through Education USA or whatever that can maybe assign you something and have you show us about a little bit about your writing ability in analyzing a particular topic of your choice. So that might be like a book or a movie or an event, that kind of thing. It shouldn't be scientific writing or writing that's research or creative, because that doesn't show us your analytical writing style. And this is important for us because, as I said, research is a major part of our undergraduate curriculum. So we're expecting students to have a certain amount of ability in writing. The second component here is the pieces to request. So these are things that you'll request from your school or that are supporting you. The transcript is a very general term for all of your academic results, which I think for the most part, for most of you are probably internal grades. If you have external grades, so leaving exams, for example, a common example of that is IB if you're in an IB school or whatever, or national exams. That basically includes all of those marks that you've gotten, or in cases of exams that you haven't taken yet, that might be predicted as well. This is usually accompanied by a school report, which helps us to contextualize that as well, usually sent by your principal, or if you have a counselor at your school as well. And they also might choose to write for you on your behalf as a school counselor. This is more of a common concept in the United States for college counselors to work with students. If you don't have that equivalent representative who will write a letter for you, don't worry about it. We'll take that into account. We won't necessarily expect it on an American standard if it's not possible for you. But at the very least, we will ask that you submit 2 academic recommendations from teachers, ideally within your current or recent coursework in high school. Excuse me. And ideally in subjects that are core academic areas. So that obviously is the sciences and the humanities, the social sciences, languages, that kind of thing. But ideally not in kind of more vocational courses as well. So at least 2 of those recommendations. You can submit more than that if you like, but we only require those 2. And then the final part is to report, and this is generally with respect to testing. The testing we've required in the past has been either an SAT or an ACT. For this academic year, so for students who are applying for fall of 2021, so a year from now, we're not requiring submission of SAT or ACT, and that's partly as a response to the pandemic that has created, obviously, as I'm sure many of you know, many challenges in taking tests because test dates have been canceled or whatever. So as a result, we're not requiring the submission of SAT or ACT. We are test optional in that sense. If you've taken the exam and you're happy with your score and you want to send it to us, you can absolutely do so, and we'll consider that. But that obviously will, like I said, in any case, be alongside the transcript, your academic pieces. And if you're not submitting the testing, whether it's SAT or ACT or subject test or whatever, again, these are also not required, then you're not going to be at a disadvantage anyway. We do ask, though, is if your high school is not taught in English, if English is not the primary medium or at least a bilingual focus of your curriculum, we do ask that you take a foreign language test, an English proficiency exam in one of these forms, TOEFL, IELTS, or PTE academic. Again, we completely understand that this has had similar challenges with the pandemic in terms of cancellations. If you're able to do one of the at-home versions of this test, that should be fine as well. Do what you can, and if nothing's available, just let us know. Write us a note in the additional information session on the application, and that'll help us understand that as well. The deadline for submitting this for this year, so if you're applying for September 2021 entry, is January 1st. Most colleges do also have an early application deadline, which is usually in early or mid-November. Princeton has had that early program, early action, it was called. But also as a result of the pandemic, we paused that this year, given that there was so much uncertainty and upheaval in terms of students' environments and so forth that went starting in the spring into the summer and into the fall, that we didn't want to ask students to necessarily know, are they sure they want to apply to Princeton early or whatever? If they're not sure at that time, we just put everything together. Everyone will apply at the same time for January 1st, again, if you're applying for September 2021. If you're not applying this year and you plan to apply in a future year, we haven't made a determination on what will be the policy with respect to deadlines or SAT or ACT, because I think we still, like I said, need to know a little bit more about, how the pandemic is going to impact the availability of these tests as well as schools, so forth. So we would say that once that application process becomes active, which will usually be next summer, would be the best time to check in about that, and we'll have more of a sense of that after we get through this admission process. So I've spoken a lot about the main pieces of Princeton as well as the application and admission and financial aid processes. And I encourage you for more information to, in addition to the link I sent earlier, to connect with us through our admission website and also through our student blogs. It is International Education Week, and we've on our social media as well as on our student blogs, we've featured some great pieces from our international students on our campus, including a new podcast as well from one of our international students. They highlight their experiences as international students, as well as working with the Davis International Center, which is our primary international hub that supports students from everything from logistical processes of visas and so forth to also international orientation and establishing the international community on our campus as well. So I highly recommend you check out those features as well. So with that said, I want to stop there. That's covered the entirety of the information that I wanted to share with you all. So I'll bring us all back together, and I'll now open it up to all of you. If any questions that you have, whether you want to unmute verbally or type them in the chat. I'm happy to answer those, whatever's on your mind.
If international students are interested in having a part-time or full-time job, does it Princeton include it on their campus, or we have to have it outside of the campus?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for students, if they want to have a job while they work, on campus versus off-campus opportunities, what's available? So students generally don't have full-time jobs. It's really not possible to be a full-time employee and a full-time student because all of our students are full-time. But it is very common that students, especially students who are in financial aid, will have a part-time job as well. It's very much part-time. It's usually between 5 or 10 hours per week. So something you might do in the evenings or on weekends or whatever. For international students in particular, due to visa and work restrictions, they do have to work on campus. So it's a little more challenging unless they also happen to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. It's harder for them to work at the outside coffee shop that's not affiliated with the university because that requires, U.S. governmental visas. But you can absolutely work in any on-campus that is opportunity that is provided by our student employment office on campus. So those commonly will include, working at libraries, working at sporting events, or working at some of our, coffee shops or dining services as well. So yes, it's absolutely possible, and it is pretty common for students, international or otherwise. It's just international students have to work on campus by virtue of their visa being a student visa and not a work visa. So another question that came through is there a possibility to start studying at Princeton before finishing high school, considering the qualities needed? It's possible, but it's not common or necessarily recommended because I think the best transition academically or socially would be beginning Princeton or beginning university after you've completed your high school studies. That doesn't mean you can't apply before you've finished your high school. In fact, it's much more common for students to apply during their final year. So if you're in your final year and your final academic year will end in June or July, then you can absolutely apply now to then be set up to start in September of 2021. You can also graduate first and then apply while you're on a gap year or a second gap year. That's also very common for international students. We don't have a preference. In fact, some students will apply during their final year, they'll graduate, and then they'll decide to defer their admission and take a gap year. You can absolutely do that as well. We have no preference. It's just a question of when you think you'll be ready to apply. But it's not common for students to apply to enter before they would have completed their education. So another question that came through in the chat is studying graduate programs in the U.S. and how do elite universities look at the fact that a student received undergraduate and graduate degree from institutions that are low ranked. There's excellent grades and so forth. So I think another major difference between higher education in the U.S. versus internationally, and Anya, please weigh in here from your perspective, is that ranking does exist, but it's not as draconian, if you will. I think the rankings are based on general concepts of academic resources and so forth, but that the higher ranking doesn't necessarily mean you get a better education, especially if you're looking for a more specialized fit or in terms of individual program. Princeton is usually ranked whatever, but if you're looking for a great undergraduate business program, you don't want to be looking at Princeton because we don't offer an undergraduate business program or an agriculture program as well. So I think the rankings are a little bit more amorphous, and I think there are publications that claim they can objectively rank institutions, and maybe they can based on some very broad metrics. But I think the way to look at U.S. universities is that rankings aside, it's less a question of universities being better definitively in everything from each other and more just kind of having different personalities or different abilities or different specializations. So I think that'll factor in a little bit less than you would think in terms of your future experiences. The more important thing would be, what do you do with that institution, whether it is your academic work, as well as how highly you perform at that institution. So another question was, if you're currently in your first year at university in your current country or at another university, and you want to apply, can you apply as an undergraduate student? Yes, you absolutely can. The difference there, though, is that you would apply most commonly as a transfer student. And that's usually a separate process for any institution. Everything I highlighted was for students who are applying as first years, which means they are either completing or have completed their high school education, their secondary school, but have not begun university yet. If you're applying as you've already enrolled in university and you want to switch from a current bachelor's or different degree program to somewhere like Princeton, then you'd have to apply through a different application, which is through the transfer program. For us, for example, it does allow you to use the same platform. So you could still use Coalition or Common Application, but you would use their transfer application as opposed to their first year application. And other differences would be obviously sending your college, your university grades and transcripts in addition to your high school. But that would be a different process. And the policies vary from different institutions as well, in terms of what's how you would do it and what would be available. So that would be something to speak to the office individually about. You can absolutely speak to me about it as well, because I'm both the director of all international admission and the director of transfer admission. So I speak to you about that separately as
well. I just want to maybe hop in quickly to explain the question that we had before about ranking. So if you're looking at the US ranking, you need to be aware that there is not a central list for ranking. There is multiple NGOs, also news organizations, various websites that are college, focused, that do various ranking and use therefore various methods. So you might see, same university may be ranked, top 10 or top 5, and the other list top 20 or top 30. So it really depends on the methodology used to create the ranking lists. It doesn't really matter internationally, since at least our country doesn't have ranking lists. What matters, if you are interested in the United States, that you are academically strong. So to transfer that in our language, if you are in high school, grade point average or prosjek, more than 4.0, or what will be very well, or vrlo dobar in our languages. So everything above that makes you academically competitive enough to apply for universities. Of course, the better grade point average, the more chances you might get at being accepted. And also, it's very important that you're not only academically focused, but that you're also very active in your local community and outside the classes. So anything from summer schools, volunteering will count, any sports training, dance, theater, anything that you're involved in outside of the school also counts and adds strength to your application. In that sense, if you're if you're a university student, and you're interested in potentially continuing on, maybe masters or PhDs in the States or at Princeton, you also need to be academically very strong. So if your university is using if you're currently studying in B&H universities and they're using grade point averages that are up to 10, you need to be above 9 and further on. If your university is using up to 5, maximum being 5.0, then you need to be 4.0 and above grade point average, or what we would call prosjek. I hope that kind of explains, but I also want to really mention that it's important that you find a school that really fits you. That's a personal fit for you, and that you have a realistic chances of getting in. Education USA can help you with that. So if you're not sure, we don't really advise looking at various ranking lists, because it might be confusing, and then having a list of your preferences where you will apply based on just solely ranking lists. Therefore, we have these webinars like this today, so you can meet representatives of colleges, so you can hear from firsthand what it is like to study, to apply, what scholarships are there. If you have any questions regarding that, do reach out to your nearby Education USA center.
Absolutely. I can't stress that enough or support that enough. I mean, the Education USA they're great partners for us as well. But I think they're also in a unique position that they give you the access and they have the knowledge about U.S. universities, but also better than any U.S. universities, they have, in addition, the knowledge of the local systems in Bosnia or wherever they happen to be as well. So they are in a very unique position, unlike anyone else, to be able to advise you in that transition, knowing more than anybody else about both systems as well. So definitely can't support that enough. Another question just came through about a graduate program as well, applying as a graduate program. So I can't really speak to that, given that I only work at undergraduate level admission. So what my recommendation would be, for whether it's at Princeton or otherwise, is to reach out to their graduate departments as well, specifically. For the question about the transfer program, yeah, you can absolutely get in touch with us. Our main transfer program office email address is this one here. I'm just plugging it into the section, and my colleagues and I will definitely be able to assist you with that as well, and answer your questions on that front.
Sorry, I have one more question. So, if student had been taking some sort of English course, or if we have finished an IB program, what type of test should we take on top of those diplomas when it comes to English knowledge?
So, if you've completed an IB program, if it's taught primarily in English, then I don't think you'd need to take a English proficiency exam. But if it wasn't, then I would recommend taking one of the ones that we accept, which is the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the PCE academic. TOEFL and IELTS are the most common, and they do have at-home versions as well. So I would advise taking one of those if you're able to.
So I had a couple of questions. Just can you hear me? So hi, my name is Haris, and Princeton is one of my top choices, if not the top one. So my questions are kind of personal. So I took the liberty of quickly Googling you. I hope you don't mind. And I see that you were in a similar position as I am actually right now. So I'm hoping to study an undergraduate program at Princeton, primarily neuroscience or something that has to do with natural sciences. However, I'm also interested in the social sciences part. My hobbies include debating, public speaking, MUN, and I see that you actually majored in chemistry from Princeton and then went on to an MA in education. So did Princeton somehow help you decide? Did you take multiple courses? I mean, how that came to happen? I'd like to have Princeton help me decide what I want to study as my major.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's a really good strength of not just Princeton in particular, but any liberal arts institution that gives you that flexibility and doesn't require you, unlike what you might see at an international university, to know what you want to study from the beginning and stick with it. Now, for me personally, I did know I wanted to major in chemistry and I stuck with it, but at the same time, I didn't want to study just only chemistry. I think it's a great opportunity for students who are maybe thinking of different areas or just want to apply different areas too. So I, in addition to majoring in chemistry, knew I wanted an institution that allowed the opportunities to take history classes and social science courses and literature courses as well. Or maybe you're a student who is maybe interested in one area or maybe another area, and you want a chance to take classes in both. Princeton doesn't require you to apply to a given major. You get the opportunity to maybe tell us what your interests are at the time, and you can indicate your top choices at the time when you apply, but there's no expectation that you actually choose that, and you don't choose that major or commit to that major until your second year for the most part. The exceptions are engineers, so they have 6 engineering departments to choose from, and they'll usually declare their major towards the end of their first year. You'll still have opportunities to figure that out as well, and even change your major afterwards if you want. But there's great advising, there's great opportunities to take different classes and allow yourself to explore different areas and commit to your major and reaffirm what that passion is, or maybe discover new ones. Like as I mentioned, you can indicate when you look at the application, if you looked at it already, it does say of our departments and of our certificate programs or minors, what are your top 2 choices right now? And about 70% of students change their mind from what was number 1 on the application to when they actually choose their major. So I think it's a really good illustration of how the university supports that that opportunity, like I said, to explore different areas and not lock yourself in necessarily. That's a good question to ask any institution you're applying to as well. Some do say you have to apply to the journalism school or you have to apply to the engineering school. Princeton doesn't require that. We just ask for your interests, and then you make that decision after you get here. But it is a good question to ask that institution you're applying to in terms of what program do you have to apply to and when do you have to choose your major or anything beyond that.
Okay, thank you so much. And one more thing, the graded written papers. So your application is pretty straightforward regarding the essays, but the graded written paper, especially for international students, at least for me, it's a bit tricky because I'm not really sure how big of a role it plays in your admissions process. So I don't know what to submit, since the majority of the coursework, at least for high schools, taught in Bosnian. I'm actually in a Cambridge program here in Bosnia. So may I submit my AS level English coursework or something like that? Because they do specify that it has to be in English. But other than that, I'm not really sure how big of an impact on my overall application it has.
Yeah, I mean, so we ask for it because, like I said, we just want to get a sense of the student's writing ability. We understand that there is by necessity greater flexibility that we need to apply to international students who don't have, unlike U.S. students, most of their coursework in English necessarily, and the assignments that of a paper, an assigned paper, can look very different internationally. So we basically ask, what's the best opportunity you have, which should generally come from your English class, because that would be the most common, most likely one to be taught in English, and written, and therefore written in English as well. So yeah, an AS level or an IB English paper, whether it's something you took home and wrote, or maybe it's an in-class assignment, if that's the best thing you have, that's absolutely fine. Ideally, if it has a grade and any comments from your instructor as well. We'll take the best thing that you have available that is ideally, like I said, analytical or expository, your analysis or you're writing about a particular theme or book or movie or that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you so much. I just have only one more and I'm yielding my time. So this one's a bit political. So you changed, I remember reading about Princeton changing their Woodrow Wilson College a couple of months ago. They changed the name completely and I think you're rebuilding it. So I'm guessing you deemed it not to be representative of Princeton's values. But since I'm somewhat interested in becoming a part of Princeton Space Center and certain programs, I'm curious to know, do you think there are more things like this that need to be changed around campus? Do you think that there are more things that don't represent Princeton values but are currently integrated in the Princeton core?
So yeah, so the Woodrow Wilson question is definitely, there are a lot of layers to that. I think the university did try to explain, why. I think it's less a question of yes or no, did it reflect the values, but I think it was the complexity of it and some of the values, particularly the racist values and systemic racism that existed in the legacy of Woodrow Wilson as well as other parts of the university, is something that we felt we had to remove and rename, not necessarily erase, but create representative nomenclature, representative information that's more reflective of our more diverse international, national student body as exists right now. So the university is addressing other, so I can't answer this from a sense of like what I think, because what I think is not relevant. It's basically what the university thinks and what the university is trying to do. So I would encourage you to if you go to some of the pages we have on our website, I can drop the links in here as well. President Eisgruber, who was the major force in addressing the renaming of the Woodrow Wilson School to now the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, has also addressed, charged the university administrators, trustees, and so forth to look into other areas of what we call systemic racism. So basically programs, not necessarily programs, but names that unintentionally, but because of the historic vestiges of the university, still embed racism, or not just necessarily anything specific to race, but tenets or experiences or past formats that are not inclusive to students, not just to race, but whether it's any other creed, any other protected category of origin, of religion, disability, sexual identity, that kind of thing as well. So I think, but particularly looking to find those other areas where we can address systemic racism and move them forward. Now I'll just drop some links on that that I think can give you a little bit more perspective of what the university's thoughts are about what we've achieved with Woodrow Wilson, as well as other areas of addressing this too.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, is there any major difference between education of an athlete student and a regular student?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Between what student?
An athlete and a regular student.
Differences with respect to academic requirements, or?
I was just thinking classes and education as to, is there any difference between attending classes?
Got it. Yeah, so that's a very good question to ask, and I think it is a dynamic that changes across the U.S. based on, like I said, the emphasis on athletics and the athletic program at that individual institution. I think you'll find there's a range there. At Princeton, because as a part of the Ivy League, because academics are forefront, in addition to our strong athletic programs, there are no differences or concessions made for athletes, just like there are no differences or concessions made for high-level musicians or dancers. They may do athletics or performing arts at very high levels. Some of them may be academic as well in the case of performing arts. But in addition to that, their academic requirements and expectations are exactly the same as every other student. There are institutions, larger state institutions, where different concessions may be made for athletes as well. And that is, I can't really comment on that because it doesn't exist at Princeton. But just because of the structure of our programs and the Ivy League in general, there are no differences in academic requirements for any students, athletes, artists, or otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to quickly jump in again. Are there any more questions? Okay.
In the meantime, I put in a couple extra links to address Harris's questions about this university statement about Woodrow Wilson, but then also looking forward to, which I think will address some of those areas as well. And there are a lot more articles that you read to related to this the university's put out, but these are a couple good starting points.
Thank you, Alex. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank everyone for participating today, for joining us. If you in future have questions, use the links that Alex has copied in the chat box, or additionally, you can reach out to your neighboring Education USA Center. You can find all of our contact addresses and phones and email addresses on educationusa.BA. There is 4 centers: Sarajevo, Banja Luka, Tuzla, and Mostar. If you're not located in those cities, we can talk to you via online means. So do reach out to us. Do reach out to your advisors. We can help you. We can help you create your college list. We can help you apply. If you have any questions you're not sure of, we can help you. If you are attending a public high school in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially when it comes to letters of recommendation from your professors, if you're not sure of how to do that or how professors to write that, they can reach out to us. We can send them useful documents on how to write it. And if you do need translation of recommendation letters, you can also reach out to us. We do it for free. Our advising is for free, so I want to highlight that. You don't have to pay for our services. If there are no more questions, please do sign up for getting the news from the Princeton. I think you will find it very useful and very valuable when it comes to more maybe particular questions that you have today about sciences or life as a student athlete at Princeton. If again there are no more questions, I would like to thank everyone. Let's say last chance for questions. If you have any, unmute yourself and ask. Okay. It seems that we don't have any more questions. Once again, thank you all so much. I believe the recording will be good and will be available on Education USA B&H YouTube channel. I want to thank Mr. Basson especially. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with our students, to answer their questions, and I hope we collaborate in the future as well.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Farati, thank you for inviting me, for organizing this, and please stay in touch. Please stay in touch with Education USA. They're a great resource, and I can't recommend them strongly enough. So thank you again for everything.
Thank you, and everyone have a good rest of the night.